The Philadelphia Eagles don't need a rebuild. They need a decision because chasing Myles Garrett isn't about adding talent. It's about declaring who they are right now. And if the rumors are even partially true, this isn't a move for depth. This is a move that reshapes the entire identity of the team. Let's start with the context. The Eagles lost key pass rush presence in free agency. The edge rotation isn't what it was during their Super Bowl run. And in today's NFL, pressure isn't optional, it's structural. At the same time, there's growing flexibility. A potential post-June Fern move involving A.J. Brown could open cap space. The front office has draft capital, and most importantly, they have a track record of aggressive decision-making under Howie Roseman. Then the rumor resurfaces. Philadelphia is super hot on Garrett, a deal that could involve multiple first-round picks. On the surface, it sounds extreme, but for this organization, it's not unrealistic. The obvious narrative is simple. Garrett is one of the most dominant pass rushers in football. You add him, your defense immediately becomes elite. You pair him with a strong interior, and suddenly every offense you face is under pressure, literally every snap. In a division with young quarterbacks, that's a nightmare. And historically, the Eagles have won at their highest level when their defensive line controls the game. So the logic checks out. Add Garrett, win with pressure, compete immediately. But that's only the surface level thinking. Because trading for Garrett isn't just about what he gives you, it's about what you give up, not just in picks, but in flexibility. 3 first-round picks is not a small decision. That's not a move you make to improve. That's a move you make when you believe you're one piece away from controlling the conference. And that belief has to be precise, because if you're wrong, the consequences stretch for years. Let's go deeper into the football side. Garrett changes how offenses operate before the snap. Protections shift, tight ends stay in, running backs chip. That has a cascading effect across the entire defensive structure. It creates one-on-one opportunities elsewhere. It speeds up quarterback processing. And under pressure, decision-making deteriorates. That's where games are actually decided, not in highlight plays, but in rushed reads and forced throws. Clipping moment number 1. Elite pass rush doesn't just create sacks, it forces decisions quarterbacks aren't ready to make. Now think about this in the context of Philadelphia's current roster. If you add Garrett, you're not just improving the defense, you're changing the equation for the entire team. Because suddenly, you don't need your offense to be perfect. You don't need explosive scoring every drive. You need control, field position, turnovers, short fields. That's how dominant defensive teams operate, and that's a different philosophy than what we've seen from the Eagles recently. Which brings us to the hidden factor. This move only makes sense if the Eagles are intentionally shifting their identity, and that ties directly back to the offensive uncertainty. If there's even a real possibility that A.J. Brown is moved, then the Eagles may be preparing for a less explosive offense, more structured, more balanced, less reliant on individual dominance. If that's the case, investing in a defensive cornerstone like Garrett isn't just aggressive, it's strategic alignment. You're offsetting offensive variance with defensive control. Clipping moment 2. This isn't offense versus defense. It's about deciding where you want your margin for error to live. Now let's talk about the turning point, because there's one decision that defines everything here. It's not whether Garrett is available. It's whether the Eagles believe their current window is open right now. If they believe they are one dominant force away from controlling the NFC, they make the trade. They don't hesitate. They don't protect future picks. They act. But if there's hesitation, if there's uncertainty about the offense, about roster balance, about timing, then this move becomes too risky because Garrett doesn't just cost picks. He locks you into a timeline, a narrow one. And that's where the pressure comes in, because once you make this move, there's no gradual build. There's no patience. Every season becomes Super Bowl or failure. That's the reality of trading multiple first-round picks for a defensive player. Clipping moment number 3. Trading for Myles Garrett isn't a roster move. It's a deadline. Now zoom out to the big picture. If the Eagles land Garrett, they instantly become one of the most dangerous teams in the conference. Not because they're the most balanced, but because they become the most disruptive. They dictate games. They control tempo through pressure. And in a conference that's been shifting power toward high-powered offenses, that's a counterpunch. But if they miss or choose not to pursue it fully, then we're looking at a different strategy. One built on sustainability, draft capital, offensive development, long-term flexibility. Both paths can work, but they require completely different decision-making. And that's what makes this moment so important, because everything is connected. The A.J. Brown situation, the interest in receivers like Dontavian Wicks, and now the renewed buzz around Myles Garrett. Individually, they look like separate stories, but together they point to one underlying truth. The Eagles are recalibrating, not rebuilding, not retooling, recalibrating. In the end, this isn't about whether Myles Garrett fits in Philadelphia. He fits anywhere. This is about whether the Eagles are ready to define their next version. A team built on explosive offense and star power, or a team built on pressure, control, and defensive dominance. Because once they make this decision, everything else follows. And in the NFL, it only takes one decision to change everything. This isn't a rumor anymore. It's a pattern. Because every time the Philadelphia Eagles get close to a turning point, one name keeps coming back, Myles Garrett. And now the noise is getting louder again. Not from fans, not from speculation, from people around the league who are actually picking up the phone. That's what makes this different. Because this isn't just about adding talent. This is about identity. The Eagles lost pieces. The pass rush isn't what it was. The defensive front, once the foundation of their Super Bowl run, has cracks now. And in Philadelphia, that's not something they ignore. That's something they fix aggressively, which is why Garrett keeps coming up. The most dominant pass rusher in football. Violent, consistent, game-wrecking in a way that changes entire game plans before kickoff. Add him to this roster, and everything shifts immediately. But here's where the story tightens. Because a move like that doesn't happen in isolation. It connects to everything else we've been hearing. The uncertainty around A.J. Brown, the post-June 1 timeline, the financial flexibility that suddenly appears if a major offensive piece is moved, that's the turning point. Because if the Eagles are even considering something as extreme as sending multiple first-round picks for Garrett, then they're not thinking small. They're thinking about flipping the entire structure of the team, offense to defense, star receiver to generational pass rusher. And that's not just a trade. That's a philosophy shift. It says, we don't need to outscore you. We're going to overwhelm you. And there's another layer here that makes it real. Relationships. Howie Roseman and Andrew Berry aren't strangers. There's history there. Trust, communication lines that already exist. In deals this big, that matters. Because when you're talking about moving a player like Garrett, especially one with contractual control and leverage, you don't start from zero. You start with who you trust. And Philly has that. But don't miss the risk, because this kind of move doesn't just cost picks. It locks you into a window right now. You give up that much draft capital. You're saying this roster is ready to win immediately. No waiting, no slow build, no margin for error. And if it hits, you're looking at a defensive front that could shut down an entire division. Young quarterbacks in the NFC East suddenly dealing with relentless pressure every snap. If it doesn't, you've sacrificed the future for a present that couldn't deliver. That's the line the Eagles are walking. Aggressive, but calculated. Because this isn't fantasy. This is exactly how Philadelphia operates. They don't hesitate. They don't sit still. And when a player like Myles Garrett even becomes remotely available, they don't just check in. They push hard. So now the question isn't whether the Eagles are interested. That part feels real. The question is whether they're willing to go all the way. Because if they are, this won't just be the biggest move of their offseason. It'll be the move that defines everything that comes next.